Welcome to Cree Talks Podcast. I'm your host, Michaela Carriere. This is presented by Uskie Holistic Adventures and Big Eddy Lodge. This is Episode 3, Two Cultures. Today we're going to talk about the different cultures that have influenced me. I'm going to interview my mom, Renee Carriere. I grew up in a bicultural life, living on the trapline with my parents, listening to my dad's family speak Cree, and living off the land, but also being raised by my mom, Renee, who grew up with a very different life than my dad. Renee is from Saskatoon, the big city compared to this life. Her father was an immigrant and her mother the daughter of a minister. She was an outdoor enthusiast, always skiing, rowing, or canoeing. She is a remarkable athlete. She went on to get a degree in education to teach. Her life before meeting my dad was very different. She was living with roommates and working in retail at a sporting goods shop. She trained every day early in the morning and drove to work on a motorcycle. Then she met my dad, Solomon Carriere, and her life changed quite a lot after that. So today I have Renee here to tell her story of first meeting my dad, Solomon. And my dad is here to translate her story into Cree and to tell his side of the story. Welcome, Renee, to the Cree Talks podcast. Can you introduce yourself?
Nitsanigasun, Renee Carriere. I'm here today to be part of Cree Talks, and I'm going to share the story of when I first came to this land known as Big Eddy.
Yatsi muna nuts tansiagi pe siano ta mistapiga muak.
So how did it all start, Mom?
I was raised in the city, always with an outdoor life during the week and on weekends. We were always outside, whether it was playing or involved with sports. That was how I was brought up. And great family, really supportive, and involved with, like I said, sports as I grew up. So it was mainly cross-country skiing and eventually rowing. And then I worked in retail in a sports shop when I was very young, and I wanted to learn about canoeing because I felt if I was going to sell canoes, I needed to learn how to paddle a canoe.
Nigi roka Igivici chika kapame moinigi an ego igi asepue an ego igi suskue poswani na api pugu me gutamane yu mistegi pame moinigi an ego igi atuski ani na taiga mego ge tawage agan ya pachita na kaise pachita en uma basus kuepos wana miskaen ago egi nute kiskeni taman kaisip miskan ne tawagana ni apachita na goni kagi nagiskok Solomon.
So I had a friend who I'd sold some ski equipment to, and he said, Renee, if you want to learn about canoes, I have just a guy. There's a guy who's just started university in Saskatoon, and his name is Solomon Carriere. And he's not just a canoer. He's a world champion marathon canoer, and that's who you should meet. So I said right away, okay, set it up. So I went out to the ski trails, and I met this guy named Solomon Carriere. And we went skiing because it was in February, and we couldn't paddle yet.
Goni eguta gisko na pero goni eguta gimachia suskue pausunan goni gi atigisken ma guta utse goni egusigis panuanema.
We went skiing, and eventually we went canoeing. And then Solomon wanted me to meet his family and to come and see his home where he grew up and where he was making a living. And so we said, okay, we would go in.
Igoni gutangi machip miskana ne uten magistapinani. Maga notwi pagini pinan megote an magi wigi agite. Igoni gi taswanan Mateo kagi de watsasko wanige ak ginute opa tageta ka wigia ago isto mo te ginute pe opa tagan manistam gone gusigispano.
So we paddled in. It was in the springtime, and it was the time that they were going to be muskrat trapping. So remember, I came from the city. I didn't even know that there was trapping. I'd never been up north, which Cumberland House was considered up north. And so we drove up and then we paddled into what is called Big Eddy. And there was a small cabin, a long, narrow cabin. And his mom and dad were there. And his older brother and his older brother's wife, and they had a young, like a 2-year-old child there. They were all there for the spring muskrat season.
Igoni gipe miskanan utay si ka mistapi ka mo age gutay wa kiapi maskomi ki tawa usaga igani gego kiapi gi moni ganian kiapi ana unigi go Solomon ki wanigen ya kiapi tsego na itagmi istego tegi pe guigeta ya uste se go wigi maga ne go tansa ego tagia ogmi no egi pe guige tsigan mame se wista ho ego nen ego tagi ti wanige ogan watsasko gutsi ego ne peg pur da was pegan ma waska yani tagia tsigan ma ka gini pa tsiga mitsu tsigmi nego tan mai
So I remember when we got there, his mom had prepared this big, huge feast, and there was these huge buns, and they were just amazing. And she had made them out of a little tiny wood stove, and the cabin was long and narrow, and a small kitchen at sort of the front of the cabin, and in the back was all beds, bunk beds, big double bed. It was all beds. And I was to sleep on the top bunk, and his brother was on the bottom bunk. And I'd never slept in a bunk bed. And having his brother kept kicking the bottom of the bunk bed and just sort of, I guess, teasing me and teasing Solomon because he'd brought his girlfriend home. And I remember thinking, like, wow, it felt like home. You know, as soon as I sort of set foot on that land known as Big Eddy, I felt at home. And this was this big family, and they were all talking. And I remember just sort of thinking, it was such a soft way to fall asleep. You fell asleep to story, to language, and it just felt good.
Katagus na go degote segi page sigani get Solomon umama yumisi page sigani get anima waskai ganan mai tagia pegan mai ta mitsu cheke go pegi tani mane pak ego nego tano ni pe nego de itaga no ego tan kage no sigomi ego egenatsu mego sei tutta man ego nego tai ati atsimo tsek pa petsek ego meneni tago ego en mayo ni stamani mego sei sip opata man ego nen me ne pena ni na poste o pegis mig o pegatami Goni nan mat ismige ginipaan ego Solomon uste sa attamige pasko tagano nipein papitum mastaumi tenittamana egenegu sisiopattamaan.
And I know that they were checking me out because I was, perhaps going to be the partner for their son, their youngest son. And I remember going out the next day and we were going to go muskrat trapping. Solomon was actually going to set fire to one side of a lake, and so his brother was taking me inside a wooden sleigh behind a snowmobile. I'd never been in a snowmobile, never been in, of course, a wooden sleigh. And I left dressing as I would, for a big ski trip in layers of clothing. And I remember his mom sort of shaking her head and, commenting that, you need to have more clothes. You need to sort of dress properly. It get cold out there. But I knew how to dress. And of course I got cold pretty quick. And so I learned to take advice from all of those that are around me.
Goni ego tayo mindewaniga anan ki toman me gisega goni gote bapampan nane gote pampusita ya Solomon ni uste se pampusita go wina Solomon te agami ge egi passa wetan me gota chigas ke passa ganiao otsas coachen mai go pegito de gote wina si passa de goni ne pampanianan te pami wanige ke wani gota attiga tapissimit ego miste papito me pagis nani gota ega tapissimit.
So I remember Solomon left, and then I went with his brother, and we were out behind what's called Big Eddy on Ben's Lake. And we didn't go very far, and that wooden sleigh started to kind of whip behind, the snowmobile on the packed frozen lake. And of course it flipped and I fell out. And I remember Solomon's brother just laughing. He never asked if I was hurt or okay. He just laughed, knowing I think it looked so funny. Solomon, I think, was across the lake and probably laughing as well. So I dusted myself off and got back in and learned how to ride on a wooden sleigh.
Ego tapsna mistay papi mistay papi ego te sipagis na ego mamas kata ne papi chik monda getsin ego mate yo minoya nego sis mate sagis nan busti papi ego ne datia nan kain dat subepan nan ego ne tigiskeni ten kasi pusi tana pusi tuma enak.
So maybe it was some kind of initiation, and I passed the test. So we went out muskrat trapping, and it was very, very interesting. It's at a certain time of the year, so it's springtime. It's usually that March into maybe middle of April if you have the right conditions. And the muskrats build a house, and the fur trappers in the Cumberland House area would go out and set traps in each of the houses and harvest, 3 and 4 muskrats from each house, and then leave it, and then bring the muskrats back, and then the family all that were there would help skin and dry the muskrats, and they would also debone, prepare the muskrat meat as well, and smoke the muskrat meat, and it's a real delicacy to also eat the meat of the muskrat. It's a really very good tasting meat.
Watsaskoni mistay ni mama skata ogan isipamia tigani watsaskayo Egat naatsik ego pegiaatsik ego gaskapasootsik muatsikani watsasko ego egisteni maatsikani watsasko nuaju igatsinit ego ea ego tautsip maatsiisutsigan maju ja isip pamiisutsigan visto opagan ego seitatuskeetsigan maju egat naatsikani watsasko ego Kaganoani usiatsik ego kagano ewichitutsik usiatsikani watsasko.
And so Solomon was showing me how he proudly made a livelihood and how he could help provide for a family if we were together. And so I learned how to harvest muskrat. I learned how to skin and stretch muskrats, but I could never come close to my mother-in-law, Josie Carriere. She was remarkable and how fast and efficient she was. And but it was just a wonderful time of our life as it went on to be, was that muskrat season, because it's just it's family, you're making a wonderful livelihood for your family.
Ngonin mego tayo pinisnistan gigiskenoma ego kaisi pagunatsaskeen ego kaisi pamiaigani watsaskok mawi muaguk kagino gigiskenoma itana Solomon umama ego mots wiga pegan gutsigaskitan taas kuina gi tastapite vehini nagatsiata ni watsasko wina maga utstapuina gigaskita niista igusi kaisi upige joasimisak niista gigaskita nataina igusi tuttama niista.
So muskrat trapping is one part of a life that we made here at Big Eddy, Solomon and I. And I learned a tremendous amount from the people of Cumberland House who brought me in as part of the family, but in particular to my father-in-law, William Carriere, and my mother-in-law, Josie Carriere, who then took me in as a daughter and taught me all that they knew of the land going forward.
Gonin mutagi tagusnaron magi nanas kumaugan pagigiskenoma itsigani kaisi tuskean uta ka tuskean pachitano maskik kitaskinoma misweuta kini gonuta wichiguan kaisi machiswan ego egiskenoma guan mina kaisi opbagay nag etusket ego igi minene muanan ma egigiskenoma itana William Carriere Josephine Carriere eganeni egigiskenoma itsi kaisi etuskean ego egi nanas kumao kanima kagi pesi opmai ute ewanige etsik ego pachita etsik humu taskio.
And my parents gave me, John and Evadne, gave me their skills and strengths to make a home here on the land for both Solomon and all our children. And I think that we've been able to bring together different cultures and come out stronger with understanding different worldviews and different ways of knowing.
Ego nanas kumao ka wisto ni mama gombapa wisto egi pe agamaski utse ni papa gutu te ni mama utegi nagiskot ego wisto megi gisknoma itse gaisi tuskean ego egi opaten tik ega ta matseni magaina kagano pegan spizia mopagan kagano pegan isi kaisi op miswa ga pagan ego ni nigi go ke wigi giskino maitsik ego ta peruti an ego ni gusigi hispanu Jutsi animitan gimineni ten semak egon jawasime sagnista utangi pigiawak ego enmeyo egisiopat nuske chigani ansinyaga gi nagisko ikta sku Solomon mama egonista ego papawa ego mina nina ni mama gon papa egi wichi chigan magaisian
Egose?
Egose. So that's my two parents, Renee and Solomon Carriere, talking about their lives together, their 38 years of marriage in a bicultural family. I love this story of my parents meeting. It's amazing to imagine what a culture shock it was for my mom. She was so brave. Remember, it was a time before cell phones or any internet. So when she set out as a young woman to the woods with my dad, her parents had no way to get a hold of her. And imagine going from a culture where everyone has a separate room to sharing a cabin with an entire family. And then experiencing all those new things like trapping, riding a sled, and hearing Cree for the first time. I admire my mom so much, and she inspired me not only to be brave, but also to be open-minded. That's all for today on Cree Talks Podcast. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please check out Usky Holistic Adventures on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and on my website. To spell that is ASKI Holistic HOLISTIC Adventures. And send feedback to uskyadventures@gmail.com, askiadventures@gmail.com, and share my show and subscribe to my podcast. Tenege Egose.